And so if you do have questions at any point at all in the workshop, do please feel free to just turn on your mic, interject, raise your hand, leave those comments in the chat, and we will do a Q&A at the end as well if you want to save your question until the end. Alrighty. So today we're talking about the GL series, which is called Global Literature. And so in the GL track, the books that are selected are based on kind of global admissions. So the idea here is that a lot of the novels are going to be critically acclaimed, award-winning or like best-selling novels that you might find on a common like English literature high school level syllabus. And so this is for a good track for students who are applying to go to international school in Korea or students who are going to go and study abroad. The GL track also has some GT classes. So it's like global admissions, global literature, and global kind of TOEFL as well. So if we look at the objectives here, there are a few TOEFL classes that I'll talk about in which the students just essentially simulate the IBT TOEFL. They either do reading, listening, or speaking and writing components and do those simulation tests. That's the first type of objective, because again, if they are going to be admitted internationally into a foreign school or study abroad, they need to have high TOEFL scores. And then, of course, that's paired with the literature piece where students are reading contemporary and classic English literature. Okay. Right, so here's everything at a glance. You can see that there are two tracks called GT 101 and GT 102. Those are the TOEFL classes. So that's like global TOEFL. And then the rest of them are GL 100 series, 200 series, as well as 300 series. So that's one of the differences if you were here yesterday. The storytelling class doesn't have any 300 level classes to date, but our global literature class does have a 300 level, which I'll talk about. Okay, so in that global literature type class, what can we expect for output? Of course, we're reading classic literature, and so we might be doing things like analytical essays, comparative essays. I like to also piece in different creative writing prompts because literature, of course, is so subjective. Okay, and then things like flash fiction, poetry, character studies, maybe rewriting the ending of a novel, things like that are all possible projects. All right, if you were with me here yesterday, this will look familiar, but I like to include it in any of my workshops just to give perspective because for me, I've been a Cheongdam teacher and trainer for a few years now. And when I first started, I think I didn't really have a clear perspective on how busy my students really were. And when I compare like a typical Korean student's elementary schedule against what I do in an average week, our students are busy, like busy. So if they're not getting their literature homework done, always try to lead with empathy, right? You want to consider doing things like setting personal homework goals. So in the literature classes and the storytelling classes, I give out reading scaffolds to help the students when they go home and read. There'll be a few prompt questions with page numbers, kind of like in a V1 class. You know how we have those like 3 main scenes that the students do in their workbook. Similar to that, I have the students in lit classes fill in handouts as well, but I just tell them that like at least answering one question or reading a couple pages is better than nothing at all. So when your students are coming to class having done like absolutely zero, I think that's when there's really cause for concern. But if they've tried and even done a little bit of the assigned homework, then I think that, we want to be really empathetic. So some tips I have are to prep the class as if no one has read, because we know that that can occur, and we want to make the class, as palatable and as accessible to everybody who's in the room. So even if our students haven't read, we can do things like including additional media cards, video cards, trying to get the students to think about personal questions instead of the reading comp questions, and really kind of leaning on some of those V1 teaching methods. Just by a show of hands, who has taught V1 before? Just to see if what I'm saying here is kind of connecting. Okay, so a lot of people have. If you have not taught V1, that is just like a reading class, a story-based class. And so in V1, what we'll do is we'll do some close reading, right? So we're going to go ahead, open up the book and read a specific paragraph or couple of paragraphs out loud together as a class. You can do popcorn reading and call on different students to read out loud. And that way, everyone has read that scene all together in the classroom, and we can discuss it in detail, both for comprehension and for personalized questions. Okay, so just keeping that in mind when we step into the master's classroom, although the students are high level, they are still similar ages, right? So if you have like a fourth grade or fifth grade Tara or bridge student, who likes to fool around and doesn't get their work done, but they're like, okay, they're low or mid, whatever, right? But in masters, the students can still be fourth or fifth grade. It just means that they have a higher fluency and potentially higher cognition too. They might be, very advanced students, but they're still young. So always just keeping that in mind, I think is a great tip that I wanted to share. So let's dive into some of the programs now. The first one I'm going to show you is the GT track, which is the TOEFL track. And these classes, y'all, are super simple. All we really need to do right now here, I think, is look at the breakdown of the class syllabus and what we're going to accomplish. So effectively, after we take attendance, the class starts with a review test. Okay, so the review test, this is an error. This should say 30. They take a review test for this is the vocab test. Vocab test is just simple. It's 3 minutes, but simulation test is for all of the reading components, okay? And then we review their answers. So effectively for an hour and a half, the students simulate and take a test, and then we review the answers that they missed. And then for listening, they simulate and take the test, and then review the answers that they have missed. And that's effectively all that we need to accomplish in this class. So this is going to run kind of similar to like an A2 high, if you've taught A2 before. Any A2 teachers, if you want to raise your hand, A2 high, just to see if I'm making some connections here. Okay, A2 high is like an admissions-based class where we teach them test-taking strategies. So this is going to be really, really similar. You're just teaching the test-taking strategies, and really your only teaching time are these review moments. Otherwise, the students are just taking the test. Okay, so that's the reading and listening. The other class is where we do both integrated and independent writing and speaking. So this would be like day 1 class, for example, where they just do reading and listening. And then this would be the day 2 class where they practice speaking, integrated speaking, as well as independent speaking. And then they practice writing, integrated writing, as well as independent writing. So both types. And so we're going over strategies for how to do those. There are a variety of exercises where they practice. They then do practice tests, and then we assess and give feedback. So to be honest, when I've taught these classes before, let's see. What are some challenges you can anticipate if you get scheduled for this class, for example, stepping into the GT 101? What kind of challenge do you think you might have?
Maybe like student motivation.
I
Totally, Brent.
agree. Yeah, the students get bored very fast
Oh
with
my
this
God, I get bored. I
structure.
think we're all gonna get bored. This is like simulation test every single week for 2 full hours, right? And it is important because, as I said, with the objective, a lot of these students, their parents have lofty goals for them. They want them to attend international school or study abroad. So they need to get these skills up. But ultimately, to be in a classroom week after week and just be low motivation, low energy, sleepy at 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., kind of bored, that's going to be a challenge that I've encountered. And so what I can encourage is taking brain breaks between the tests before and after. So what I like to do is show maybe like some interesting media that the students are doing. I also like to set challenges. So I tell the kids in the simulation for the reading, if everybody can get over 70% on their reading sim, let's listen to a few like K-pop songs and chill out after and kind of like take a moment, take a breather. And so you can kind of like gamify and challenge the students as well. Also, during the review components, another tip is when you call on students to justify, you can do it as like a points-based game. So you can put students into teams, and then the teams, you call on each team member to justify, and if they're able to do it and they got the right answer, they get the point. And then maybe the winners get to choose the YouTube video that we watch, or the winners get to choose the game that we're going to play, whatever it might be. But there needs to be a little bit of like spice and energy ingested here by the teacher. Yeah, you kind of want to inject that into the class. Otherwise, this can be like pretty dry. Okay. Yeah. All right. So those are the TOEFL classes, 101, 102, but the rest of GL is aptly named. It's global literature. We're focusing on lit classes. So this is at a glance, everything that we offer. The 100 level classes, there are 3 of them. The 200 level classes, we have 4 of them. And then we have one 300 level class. I'm going to do my best to kind of like speed run and give you an overview of all of them, but today I'm also going to do a textbook walkthrough on the teacher's portal and open up the coming of age literature book and take a look and talk about some components in more detail. Okay, so GL 101 and 102 have similar objectives. They are introductory literature classes, and there's a thematic link. So G101, it's all about coming of age stories, and 102, it's all stories that feature some kind of social conflict. So if we take a look at the syllabi here, right? The Giver, The Lord of the Flies, and Ender's Game. These ones are all YA novels featuring, child characters. And for 102, we're doing The Book Thief, The Great Gatsby, and The Outsiders, and these all feature some kind of political or social conflict that's happening within the sphere and world of the characters. Most of the projects that we do in these class are writing-based projects, so like comparative essays, analytical essays, opinion-based essays, etc. But I like to give opportunities to have students do some more creative writing as well, just so we're not like killing them with too many essays. Okay, so maybe at this point, because I've just spoke on 101, it would be a good time to go ahead and look at the textbook. So let me pop over there to the textbook and we'll do a little bit of a walkthrough. Because if we understand the components and parts of the 101 textbook, it's going to be very, very similar in all of the other classes. They have the same components. Can everybody see the textbook here? Just because I jumped out of the screen sharing, we're good? Okay, thank you. All right, so I popped into lesson 2 here just because this will be the most accurate representation of what every week will look like. We start on a Scout page, and the objective for Scout is to review what happened in last week. So this is like the 3 main scenes that we read last week, the 3 main plot points. What happened? Let's discuss it. Who's Jonas? What kind of community does he live in? What are the issues in his society? We start talking about a little bit of a review from last time. This is a great page because also if students were absent in the previous week, they can get caught up to speed on what they missed. After Scout, we get into the dive pages. Now, there are going to be several different dive pages, and effectively, the textbook developers, what they've done is they've read The Giver, right? Or they've read Ender's Game, and they've selected what they believe are the core, most important scenes in order to understand plot, themes, symbols, and motifs. That's kind of the objectives we're given when we're asked to develop textbooks, is obviously like the storyline, right? But in addition to that, the themes, the motifs, and the symbols. So for example, the first one here, a theme of change, being the same or being different, right? We have different pieces of the story from what's happening on page 25 to 26. And then we have questions that the students can type their answers on the tabs, or you can just verbally discuss these. Okay, so there are a balance of RCC questions, right? So what do Lily and Jonas notice? There's only one correct answer to this, what happened in the story. So that's a comprehension check. But there are also personal questions, inference-based questions, prediction questions that will allow other students to get involved even if they don't understand the moment, right? Like, why would that be important? Would you be upset? Why do you think Jonas is upset? That kind of thing. Okay, and so there are dive pages that we go through. And in this case, there are, let's see, 6 of them in this lesson too. Now, that's a lot to get through. Generally at Mokdong, when I train my team, I tell them that you want to complete at least half. So if there's only 4 for the week, do at least 2. If there's 6 for the week, do at least 3. And the reason I feel like it's fair to modify and do half of the dive pages is because I would rather that our teachers have really kind of like high quality, in-depth, detailed discussions. And especially if the students are really enjoying a certain part of the discussion, rather than cutting it short and being like, okay, we got to get to the next page. Why don't you stick on that one section and dig deeper and get into more of the subtext with the students? That way we're having a higher quality literature discussion and the students are making better personal connections and actually enjoying the literature. That's another one of the challenges of like being a lit teacher. I find is that not everyone enjoys reading or enjoys talking about stories. And so if they are having fun and they do like the dive page that you're on, stay there a little bit longer and skip, that's totally fine. But if you have a class in which they're not really giving you much, they're just answering questions very basically, there's going to be enough content here for you to still go through all 6 pages and meet your time management goals. So dive is where we, dive in, we get into all the juicy bits of the story. And after that, we have an explore component. The idea of explore is to go over one main kind of like skill theory or kind of component of literature and go over that in depth. So in lesson 2, we're starting with something pretty basic, which they'll probably already know, and it's just plot structure. So we have the plot mountain right here. We go through the ideas of the parts, the 5 main components of plot. And on a page like this, I will say, like, this is a big wall of text, right? And so rather than just lecturing and cold calling and being like, okay, so Anthony, read all of this for me, and then Brandy, read this for me, and just reading it out loud, instead of just like lecture style, I would probably start with elicitation. So what you could do is have a media card made with maybe like a blank plot mountain and ask the students, what comes first? What's next, right? What's at the top? And elicit all of the information. That's great because it also works as a pre-assessment to see where your students are at the beginning of the term, and it can save you some time. It also means that the lesson is going to be more student-centered and students are doing, kind of all of the hard work and heavy lifting, and you're just asking the questions. So when I last taught this track, I did exactly that. I had a blank plot mountain actually just up on my whiteboard, and we chose a story that everybody had just read, which was the Graveyard Book, because they had just come from V1 and they all knew the Graveyard Book. If they haven't done V1 recently, you could choose something like one of the Harry Potter stories. There's a good chance that they've read Harry Potter, or you could ask students, a story that they've read. You could even choose a fable, something simple like Little Red Riding Hood, if you want to, kind of distill it even further and find something that everybody in the classroom will know. You could use like a fable as well. So that's the explore page, is digging into the skill. And now what we want to do is transfer this skill in some way to the project. So that's what the developers always do, is they make sure that the project has a connection to the explore page. So if in explore we were doing plot structure, the prompt is write your own story following the basic plot structure, right? Because that's one of the main checkpoints, is like, do we take the skill from explore and transfer it to the project? Now, I know myself as a teacher, probably for a lot of y'all, we like to modify projects. So show of hands, when you've been doing C2 this semester, who likes to just teach the project in the textbook, like as is? Anybody who's just teaching as is, that's my style. Okay, nice. And then can I assume then everybody else you're modifying? Is that the vibe? Yeah,
Yep.
you're coming up with PPTs, or, in the portal, we have all those media cards with other projects that teachers have made. Totally great. No problem to modify a project. The only thing I would keep in mind is the checkpoint of, in some way, incorporate the skill of plot to some degree into your project, okay? Don't stray too far away from the explore skill. That way, when your TLs or your faculty managers are watching your CCTV and, you know, giving you your class quality scores and everything like that, they see that you're reaching the checkpoint. Okay, so we just want some kind of connection. Okay, and so obviously y'all know how to run a project. We do the project. And in this class, there are a lot of standalone projects. So the students would present by the end of the class. So present to the class or just share your story with a partner and present to your partner and give them feedback. So this is the basic kind of scheme of any textbook that we're going to teach in the GL series. Okay, let me pause one moment, y'all. My cat is crying to just go out of the office. So give me one sec. Okay, go. Go, go, go. Okay, thanks for your patience. All right, so I wanted to do that little walkthrough just so you can see what the components are. Every GL class for the literature ones are going to have the scout, the dive, the explore, and then the project. So that's your basic flow. And if I pop back here to the presentation, okay, we can talk about some of the other GL classes. So at a glance, we have 201, 202, 203. There's also 204 that I'll talk about. Now, these are 200 level, which is usually scheduled for Grand Master students or middle school students. And these books are more of like the books that honestly I didn't read until like high school or uni. Like for example, Kurt Vonnegut. Has anyone read Vonnegut? Show of hands. Any Vonnegut fans in the, okay. Olivia, can I just ask you, do you remember when you first read Vonnegut?
I think I was in like, I think I was like 16, 17.
Okay, word. Yeah, that's similar for me. I was probably in that range as well. And the last time I taught this class, I had my sixth graders. So I had my lovely little 12-year-olds, and we were doing the Sirens of Titan. So, you know, students are reading and they can read at that advanced level, but we can't always necessarily expect them to grasp everything that's happening in these stories. Yeah, because they are advanced, right? I didn't read them till I was into my late teens. And some of these I didn't even experience until I was a literature student at the University of Ottawa, right? Like I didn't read Brave New World until my first year of uni. And there are some explicit themes. So that's something to keep in mind is that in the 200 series, the themes start to become more explicit. The plots themselves too have some kind of like, you know, PG-13 and above moments. So when we're prepping the books, we just want to keep that in mind and be sensitive to it. Okay. Finally, the 300 level class. This class I've only taught once in my CDI career. I don't anticipate that any of y'all are going to have this scheduled unless you are having high school students coming and attending your academy. Currently at Mukdong, we don't have any high school students enrolled, so we haven't taught it for some time now. But this is usually only taught to like middle school, third grade, or high school students because it's advanced lit. You can really just think of this as like a AP Lit class. So AP Lit is obviously what we do in high school, getting ready to go to college. And this class takes a ton of prep because, yeah, it's advanced placement lit and it's up to the branch and therefore up to the teachers to complete the program. And so what that means is there are no assigned readings or stories. The branch and the teachers have to come up with the reading syllabus and the lesson content themselves. And so usually this is not one that is scheduled, but it is an option. So I wanted to include it. Okay, so GL 101, the coming of age literature, we have The Giver, The Lord of the Flies, and The Ender's Game. This is an excellent track to teach to students because they feature children as the protagonists, which is very relatable. And we watch as these children deal with challenging situations and grow and mature. Okay, so as I mentioned before, for master's courses, the textbook developers, we're asked to do plot, theme, symbolism, motif, and I guess characterization would fit in there well, but I also think of that as part of the plot. So when it comes to coming of age story patterns, this is something you might want to make note of for your classes. This is kind of the plot mountain, but how it works for coming of age, where in the beginning, they're immature, they have to go through a problem and some kind of big decision or tough choice, which in the end leads to some kind of significant maturing. Okay, right? So when I taught this class, something I did for a project was a vision board. And so this is one of the vision boards that my students made. And I thought that this was a nice project output because it was like, okay, here you are now at this age. And what do you see for yourself in the future? What do you want for yourself? Right. So kind of trying to follow that flow of like, there are struggles that you're going to have. You're going to have to study and work hard and exercise and do all these things, but what do you want in the end? So this student said that they wanted to go hike at Machu Picchu. I remember they said they wanted to get married, like giving their end goals for how they see themselves maturing. So a vision board might be an appropriate project to run in the 101 class. Okay, then we have 102. These are the social conflict stories. So we do The Outsiders, The Great Gatsby, and The Book Thief. And these three books all face kind of like societal pressure and issue themes. So here we're trying to focus on a framework for students to understand both the societies in which these characters live. So there's very distinct societies for each one. Personally, I love teaching The Book Thief. This is such a fun and exciting story, and the students tend to love it. Great Gatsby, if you've ever read it too, is also a cool one. There's a lot of really interesting symbolism and thematic discussions that can go on. Okay, so that's 102. And then this is a new class that was recently developed. It's GL 103, and this is mystery literature. So this is still an introductory master's course, but we're looking at those like whodunit detective stories. So we have Agatha Christie. I'm a big Agatha Christie fan. She's super prolific and I've read so many of her books, but this is a great one. And then there were none. And then we do some of the classics. So we do Arthur Doyle, and then we also do Conan Doyle. Same author, right? But he's publishing under the two names. We do The Hounds of Baskervilles and A Study in the Scarlet. So these ones I would say, are a little harder for the students to read because they're kind of written in that like more traditional turn of the century British style. But this is a great one for the students to start with. Something to note for this track is that it also begins with 3 short stories. So weeks 1, 2, and 3, we do standalone short stories. And then from week 4, we start with Agatha Christie. The short stories are there to start to introduce the tropes and kind of like what happens in a mystery detective story in a small condensed way. And then we zoom out and we start doing the novels at the end of the month, starting with week 4. All right, so those are all our 100 level classes. We'll move now to the 200 level. So this track is called spiritual literature. This is one I personally really enjoy teaching as well. If you were a teacher during Cheongdam 4.0, this was an adaptation of our Literature 301 class. We've just turned it into a 200 level class. And all of these books focus on what is the meaning of life, right? So The Alchemist, The Sirens of Titan, and Life of Pi. I'd say Life of Pi is probably the most popular among the students. Alchemist is a good one too, because it's all about like, what's your personal journey? And so yeah, there's a lot of good discussion you can have, but Vonnegut's a bit of a wild card. Has anyone read this book? I'm just curious. This is like one of the most crazy stories I've ever read. The plot is not linear whatsoever. It's about a protagonist who can like materialize himself into molecules and like time travel into different realms in order to like be a god and spiritual leader of different communities. Yeah, it's pretty trippy, and I think for the students they have a hard time with this one. So I would say if you do end up with this track, Sirens of Titan takes a lot of prep, but it is a cool story in the end. Yeah, it says here, right? Particularly in the Sirens of Titans, it's recommended for older students, but that might not always be the case for who you have in the classroom. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, 202 is a dystopian literature track. Do I have any like dystopia fans in the call? I'm a big dystopian reader. I love to read this kind of thing. Daniel's giving a thumbs up, which is cool. Yeah, so these are like, I mean, the classic canon, right? You've got George Orwell, you've got Huxley, and you've got Philip K. Dick, right? So this is like a beginner's course in reading dystopian literature. We go through. Oh, sorry, I switched my slides. Yes, we go through the works of these classics, and there are mature themes in all three novels. So again, this is recommended for older students only. But if you do end up teaching it with elementary students, my tip is to just parse out which scenes you're going to read with them and make sure you kind of skip over the mature content. And if students do obviously read it at home and ask you about some of those mature themes, just do your best to be, professional, respectful, and answer very simply, and then just kind of keep it moving. Because there's a lot of, yeah, mature stuff that happens in these books. But dystopian ideas are very fun to explore because it acts as like a warning for our current society, which I think for a lot of young people now is very relatable. Okay, and then we have our wartime literature track. So these ones focus on obviously stories of war, fictionalized history, kind of the life and loss of what happens, yeah, when you go through a war. So historical context is emphasized throughout. There's a lot of yeah, like death that happens in all of these stories. So again, mature themes. I've never taught this track, but I just recently read When My Name Was Kyoko, which is an excellent story. This is actually a young adult novel, so it's written from the perspective of the children, which makes it a great first piece to start with in the class, I can imagine. But I've read Tim O'Brien's story before, The Things They Carried, and this one is like pretty heart-wrenching. This is like a real heavy hitter. So keep that in mind. There are some extreme things that happen in this novel. And The Kite Runner, perhaps you've read it before because this is a classic. I feel like a lot of us would have had it in school. Yes. Okay, so those are the syllabi for wartime literature. And then we have a new track as well, Gothic literature. So this is all about exploring kind of quintessential sci-fi. We have Jekyll and Hyde. We have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, my all-time favorite novel. And we have Bram Stoker's Dracula. So here we want to look at the conflicts that occur within characters, good and evil, right? So Jekyll and Hyde is obviously the perfect analogy for that, dealing with two sides of one coin. In Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, we go through the ethical dilemma of reanimating, the monster, and what does the monster actually represent? Who's the real monster after all? And in Dracula, same thing. We look at kind of the moral dilemmas and dealings of if you are a vampire and you need to rely on human lifeblood to stay alive, what's the best way to do that, right? So there are significant mature themes again in all three novels. I always just put this here as a warning just to have you guys know that going into things. So again, I would recommend this track for older students, but if you are teaching it with younger students, please just make the appropriate modifications. Alrighty, and then this is the 300 level class that I was talking about. That is effectively like an AP class. So it's a modular program where we choose the books that we want to teach, and then we actually make the syllabuses ourselves. So there are 3 options for syllabi that you can do. The first one is to choose 3 medium novels. So the last time we did it at our branch years ago, this is what we did. We chose 2 medium-sized novels and we ran the class that way. The second option is to do a variety of short works. So you could have, you know, like 100-page novellas, like, yeah, Albert Camus or Dostoevsky, you know, and you can read a bunch of short works all together. The final option is just choosing one text. So the Count of Monte Cristo, right? A very dense text, which I think is like something like 700 pages. Oh yeah, 686 pages. So you just choose one really long piece and you go through it for the entire semester. Okay, so those are the three options. For me personally, we preferred to do 3 medium novels because it most closely reflects, you know, what the students have done in their other master's classes. But if you're up for it, I think it also could be really cool to choose one major text and get into it in a lot of detail. So this is just something to keep in mind that your branch manager, faculty manager, and yourself as a master's teacher would be the ones confirming the books and the reading schedules. And then that means, of course, that you need to come up with all of the content yourself. So there is not a smart textbook for this class. You're actually going to be making copies of the books and handouts. There are templates that can be found in the FTP to help you teach this class. But the actual discussion questions and images and everything you're going to be using, your media, all has to be prepped out yourself and with the help of the school, which is why I don't see this one taught too often at branches unless, as I said, we have high-level middle school or high school students attending. Is that the case for anyone right now? This is just me being nosy. I just want to know, like, do y'all have any high school students at your Cheongdam campus? Show of hands. Any high schoolers? No, yeah, it hasn't been so common in the past few years, which is maybe why we haven't seen this class run as much. Okay, so here are kind of like some additional material and supplemental notes. Anthony, do you have a question?
I had a question. How do you gauge when you want to move your master students up to like 201 or 301? Like what's like your measurement that you use to
Mm.
gauge when to like level them up?
That's a great question. I appreciate that. So there are a few determiners we use. The first one at our branch specifically is we have a minimum TOEFL score that they have to achieve in order to get to the next level. So let me just stop sharing and I'll pop this in the chat just so that everyone can have it to refer back to if they want. So for TOEFL, we have rookie master, pre-master, standard master, which is 100, and grand master, 200 and beyond. So let me just type this in for y'all because I don't have a slide for it. So this is how it works at Mukdong. So rookie master, that's our first master's level, and all they do is TOEFL IBT. They do like the GT class because they finished Alba Plus, but they're not really ready yet. Their scores aren't high enough yet, which means if their score isn't high enough, they're probably not going to understand the 100 level material well. So they just take IBT classes. Pre-master and standard master students, they take 100 level classes. So the pre-masters, we tend to give them the 101, 102, and then standard master, we throw them like 103 or in ST, like other 104 like that. For grandmasters, they get to do the 200 level classes. That's how Mokdong approaches it. And then I believe the scores to get into rookie, you need an 85. To get into pre, you need 90. Standard, we want 98. And grand, you need 108. So at our branch, this is one of the gauges we use is if you can get this TOEFL score, that's one of the ways to get into the level. But the other things that we consider is report card comments and level up recommendations. So our 팀장님s come around and ask us to actually recommend, like, who do we think should move from pre to standard? Who do we think should go from standard to masters? The other thing is homework completion and C eval grades. So we also take a look at like their iLearning portals, how much homework are they doing, what are their scores there, and then the class grades that we give in every 3, 6, 9, and 12. How have they been doing with their grades there? So, yeah, I try to be really specific. Like, I don't just throw all my students A's and just try to get my grading done and go like A. I just actually give a B if they need to have a B, or if they needed a C, they're not doing any of their homework, they get a C in participation, right? They're not raising their hand or doing homework or anything like that. That means that even if their TOEFL score was really high, maybe they're not a good candidate to go to Grandmaster because they're not participating at all in Standard Master, for example. So Anthony, does that kind of sort of answer your question?
Yeah, perfectly answers. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Okay. All right, then let me pop back to some of my other tips that I have for y'all for supplemental material. Okay. So in the FTP, what you can find is something called quote notes. It's a GL document in which students find interesting quotes while they're reading, put down the page number, and then make a note about, why they chose this quote. What did they find interesting? What did they find surprising? What are they confused about? What do they want to know more about? Those kinds of things. So they do the quote notes. The other thing is we should be encouraging our students to annotate in their books and highlight the passages. So they should actually be interacting with the books at home. So it's up to you how many quotes you want the students to get done. You could recommend and say like, hey, I want you to find at least 3 quotes. Or you could, in the higher levels, tell them you want 10 quotes, for example, with 5 annotations. So this degree of homework is up to you. And that's why I mentioned before that maybe this needs to be personalized. So for some students, maybe all they can get done is 1 or 2. But for other students who attend less academy, maybe they'll be able to get done up to 8. Okay. Yes, so that's the quote note document that's in the FTP. And then the final thing I wanted to do is show y'all the drive. So let me see if I can do that. Stop share. Let me pull up the drive that we have. Because that was something I talked about yesterday in order to get organized is to use a drive, Google Drive, and not all of us have done that before. So I kind of wanted to show how it works at Mokdong at our branch. Are y'all able to see Google Drive here right now? Is that what we're looking at? Okay, thank you so much. So this is actually just something we have for all the teachers. It's called Masters Collab. And we make different folders for every single term. So we started this actually in winter, but then it got erased. Somebody deleted the whole drive, but whatever. And then we started it again from spring, summer, and we're in autumn right now. So if I pop to autumn, this is all of the master's level classes we are currently teaching and their course codes. So for example, GL 103 is being taught currently at Mokdong. And when you pop in, here are the folders for each of the teachers, right? So Alexandria, Michaela, and Josh each have these class. Here's all the vocabulary. Here are the short stories that we need to read. Here are all the project outlines that the teachers have made, and here is the homework. They also made like a scheduled template for who's going to be uploading the homework for which week so they can stay on top of things. And then what gets shared with the students is the actual teachers folder. So for example, Michaela will share this folder, Michaela teacher, with her students. So then the students are able to be in the drive and go to the homework page and see their handouts for every week. So at our branch, we do the quote notes, but it looks a little bit different. We do what we call comprehensive homework, where there are discussion questions that the students need to prep ahead of time. So they go through and answer these questions while they are reading the designated pages. Okay, so that's available for them in the drive. And then the other thing I can show is at our branch, we also do group prep. So we take turns prepping out the projects and everything too. So yeah, Exandria uploaded different projects, and then with the final project, they made it all together. So for these teachers, they decided they wanted it to be a mystery short film, and then they made a handout with a schedule and a timeline for what was going to happen, what are the goals of the project, what are the requirements, and a rubric for grading as well, so that students know how they'll get their score, what the grading scale looks like, and any additional notes. And then the actual movies, I mean, they're not completed yet, but once the short films are completed, they get uploaded into, let me see where Exandria would have it. Yeah, into the projects folder. So depending on the class she's teaching, she has the kids go ahead and do it themselves and actually upload their projects. So, Jungmin put his project right here into the drive. And so here's the PPT he made for one of the projects. And then this makes it really easy to consolidate and have like all of the grading, all of the notes. The students can see their vocabulary. If they lose the vocab paper, it's all here for them. They can study it at home. And the only thing the students need to do is to make a Gmail, right? So that at Mokdong, that's something we do with our welcome letters in week 1, is one of the stipulations is we have the students go home and for homework, make a Gmail. But I thought it'd be nice to just kind of preview the Google Drive too, in case that's something you end up wanting to do as a master's teacher. Okay, other than that, those are all of my notes, tips, and tricks, and the walkthrough of all of those GL programs. So are there any other questions that I can address at this time?
I had a quick question.
Yes,
Sorry, our
Anthony.
branch is relatively new, so I'm gonna be a
No, you're
little
fine.
annoying.
No, no,
Okay,
no.
so my other question is like with masters, do you guys usually make them take the level up testing every term, or is it like once every 2 terms?
They take it every term at our branch. So rookie, pre, and standard all take the level up test every term. But once they get to grand, no more level test. They just
Okay.
do essay writing test. It's not really a test. They just have to, during the level test week 11, they have to write like a large expansive essay as a 50-minute kind of like testing thing. But the reason for that is they're grandmaster and there's nowhere else for them to go. They've hit the glass ceiling.
Oh, that's awesome. Like here's your final reward. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah,
awesome.
right. No more testing. Just write an essay for us, show your skills and flex and whatever. And it's not really a test. So, but the other ones do because, like I said, at our school, they have to get a minimum score in order to advance to the next level. So they take it every term, just like the other kids do.
Okay, it makes sense. Okay, one other question. So in the last Zoom meeting, you had brought up the idea of like whenever kids don't have time to read the book and everything like that, you kind of like summarize it so it's easier for them to digest and at least they know something. I brought up the idea with my desk teacher, like doing that kind of stuff like that. And the only thing she's worried about is it might discourage kids from ever reading the book. Do you guys usually have that kind of problem in Mokdong? And how do you like make sure it's not becoming a habit where they're just not reading because they know you'll give them the summary anyway?
So that's a great question. So at Mokdong, the happy medium that we have found is that obviously we assign the homework, we assign the reading, but verbally we tell them like, hey, be cool, go home and use Spark Notes. If that's what you're going to do, that's up to
Mm,
you. Go on Spark Notes, use the Chat GPT. But I don't personally open up the Spark Notes and like send it to them as the teacher. As the teacher, I'm giving them the handouts and I'm giving them the reading and whatever. But I'm telling them like you need to do the bare minimum. And the bare minimum
right.
is going on Wikipedia and like reading a review or getting an audiobook. Like I show them, because audiobook's a bit different, like show them the link. Here's where you could listen to it if you prefer to do that. Or here's a YouTube video that has a summary, but I don't like send any of that to them. That way, it's kind of up to the individual student if they're going to take the route of seeking that out themselves or if they're just going to like use the material that we give them and we can avoid maybe the complaints that the desk teacher is worried about. And we're not discouraging them from doing any work. We're just kind of saying like, hey, you have to do the bare minimum.
All right, that's fair.
Yeah,
Last question. Can't remember what it was. Give me a moment.
that's fine.
Oh yeah, so with masters, do you guys, I saw your Google Drive and everything like that. So do you guys typically make your own homework whenever you're teaching a master class?
We do.
It's
So
not
that's
either.
one of
Okay.
the prep things that we like to do at our campus, and we share it. So we only have to do it every 3 weeks because typically we have like 3 teachers um, doing every master's class. But at smaller schools, I know like perhaps like I've taught at like 4 Cheongdam campuses. So at one of the ones that I taught at, it was just me. I was the only one teaching that master's class, so I had to make all the handouts myself. But for
Uh,
me, it was useful to prep that way. And it helped my students a lot because instead of just saying like, go home and read these 70 pages, and they're kind of like, what am I, what am I reading? They could
yeah.
have the handout with them, kind of like a
Mhm,
V1 class, and they would know like, what am I reading for? They could find those questions, and I would actually even give them page ranges. So between the
mhm,
pages of like 94 to 98, tell me what happened to Jonas in the community center or whatever it is, right?
mhm.
Yeah.
So you like divide the reading between the students or something like that? Okay.
You can do that. You can also divide it and you can have them share when they come to the class. There are a lot of different strategies. I mean, for me, ultimately, the end goal is to get the students participating and reading as much as
Yeah.
possible.
Hmm.
So whatever's gonna work. I mean, I'm lucky our branch, like I'm the team manager for all of masters, and so
Hmm.
I kind of get to set the
The
tone.
standard.
I set the standard, so that's a really lucky position for me to be in.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think at your schools, I think it was great, Anthony, that you were communicative with the desk teachers or with your faculty manager about it. And of course, I have to say, please just follow the recommendations at your branch.
Okay, fair, fair. All right, thank you so much.
No problem. So I've just popped my email in the chat again, just in case you do have any questions moving forward. And the last thing I'm going to do is send you again another one of those surveys. A few of you, I know you didn't do that yesterday, but if you did do it yesterday, please just complete it one more time. It's just valuable feedback for the headquarters to find out if you would prefer to keep having these on Zoom, if you would prefer to have a different trainer go over the materials with you, all those kinds of things. Yes, so once you've filled out that survey, you are more than welcome to leave the call. And I think I might be seeing a few of you again tomorrow morning. And if that's the case, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow.